Thank you for having us. I'm Jon Last, President of Sports and Leisure Research Group, and we're thankful to be able to share with you today the results of our Back to Normal Barometer, as well as custom research that we've conducted about the real estate process during these unprecedented times. We've been working together with Engagious and Rock Solutions to deliver a series of research driven by qualitative as well as quantitative studies about what people are thinking, what requirements and assurances they're going to need, and how things will look as we begin to move back to normal in the wake of the pandemic. First and foremost, our Back to Normal Barometer has been pulsing consumer opinion since early April, and we found a number of interesting contexts through which we can begin to view the way that people are looking at activities like real estate transactions. One of the key things that we've found in the barometer thus far has been a growing inflection point where an equal number of consumers are as concerned about the impacts of the shutdowns on the economy as they are about what's going on with the public health crisis. And in light of this, we've seen an increased percentage of people who indicate a sentiment that shows them ready to go right now. In other words, willing to resume their normal activities, including touring homes and attending open houses without any further assurances. As you can see on this particular slide, these are the percentage of people that are currently willing to engage in these activities without hesitation. And you can see that 56% are ready to attend an open house or tour a home for sale without any other provocation. And in fact, these numbers across a number of the different activities and verticals that we're tracking have all approached or exceeded the 50% level after beginning in early April at just about a third of consumers feeling the same way. Clearly, we are indeed hitting this point of inflection. If we move to the next slide, you'll see that while we have this larger group of people that are willing to go right now, there are still about a quarter of respondents who are not ready to go, who are requiring things like a vaccine or a proven protocol that mitigates the impact of COVID-19. And we're also finding an equal number that we call assurance seekers, those looking for a series of other assurances, be it from local or federal government, as well as medical authorities. But what is it that's going to make these people come back once they have these assurances? You can see on this particular slide that the pace with which they will resume activities is actually quite short. On this particular slide, we're looking at the specific activities of attending an open house or touring a home listed for sale. And you can see that 30%, once they have the necessary assurances, would resume the activity immediately. In fact, 75% would return within 3 months. And you can see each of the slices detailing the growing number of people that would be comfortable after each of these time junctures. Only 6% would need more than a year after receiving those assurances to go back to looking for real estate. I mentioned that we were also doing a series of qualitative depth interviews, and we've learned a number of very important things about what types of precautions people need to feel comfortable to bring them back to these activities. For example, one of the first things that we found was what we call the 4 F's of cleaning. Cleaning and sanitization practices rise to near the top of what people are looking for. And you can see that these 4 F's include frequency. That means the right amount of timing. In the case of airlines, this means in between every single flight. In the terms of home showings, it very well may mean in between each specific showing. There's also a focus on cleaning the right specific surfaces, particularly in light of some of what the CDC has been saying. People want to make sure that, particularly in a home situation, whether it's door handles, countertops, those areas that customers and viewers may come into contact with are going to be particularly important. And they want to assure that there's the right functionality, in other words, the right types of products. It's not just about spraying Windex and wiping something down, but using more professional services, which leads to the 4th of the 4 F's of cleaning. We found a very distinct preference for professionals doing the cleaning as opposed to others that may not generate the same level of comfort and assurance. Particularly in situations like movie theaters and stadiums, that means not lower paid people who are using potentially rags and just a couple of basic products, but actually those from a third party that can create the level of assurance that cleaning is being done correctly. We've also learned a fair amount about masks. People tend to generally be in favor and willing to wear masks whether it's for a home tour or other verticals that we've looked at. And while they are being accepted, it's not as straightforward. There's a number of specific conditions and situations that people are interested in. For example, what is the right kind of mask? There's so many different styles. Is it an N95 mask? Is that sufficient, the only one that's sufficient? Or what about, a scarf, or even somebody who may use a coffee filter with a rubber band around it? People are not all aligned in terms of what is considered to be adequate. There's also a series of pros and cons about mask wearing. Again, while most people seem to be comfortable with that reality, the pros and cons really generate some of the things that one needs to think about in terms of how mask wearing is enforced and in what ways. From a pro standpoint, people like the fact that masks signal that you care about others. Certainly those who are not wearing masks may be looked upon a little bit more negatively by these. There's also the pro of the fact that people are used to wearing it. As it's become more commonplace, people understand that this is one of the steps that needs to be taken to keep people safe. And people also like the fact that masks are synchronous with exposure. If you sneeze into a mask, you're obviously taking care and looking at the situation as it occurs. But there's also a negative side to wearing masks. Some are questioning the effectiveness of it, particularly with all the different conversations about what works and what doesn't work, what styles work. People wonder, for example, whether masks are really as effective as they say they are. They also recognize that they're uncomfortable and limiting in some respects. And some, even culturally, just are not mask wearers. The appearance of it is something that perhaps strikes greater fear in their minds or indicates that the situation is not normal. So these are some things that one would have to think about when it comes to wearing masks. But that's a good understanding and overview of some of the major findings from the Back to Normal Barometer. And we will be sharing the entire barometer summary findings with all of you. But beyond that, we've actually conducted a very in-depth study that focuses specifically on those tactics that buyers and sellers need to be aware of and some of the specific situations that can help make real estate professionals add value to the process during this particular timetable. And I'm going to turn it over to Rich now, who's going to dive very deeply into what we've learned.
Thanks, John. So today we're going to talk about a deep dive that we did for the National Association of Realtors that goes beyond the Back to Normal Barometer data that John just shared. So I'm going to talk today about a quick overview of the research, what we did, then talk about good news and share some good news about agents' perceived value during the pandemic. We're going to talk about what virtual tours can and can't do and how to improve them. We're going to talk a little bit about precautions, which ones are viewed as good and which ones will endure after the pandemic is over. We're going to talk a little bit about litigious buyers and sellers, how agents can meet high expectations in trying times. And I'm going to finish up by talking about key action items derived from the research. So we studied 1,040 respondents across the United States, all 50 states, all census regions, and we divide them into a variety of subcategories. Two of the most important ones are the ones you see on the screen. In the left pie chart, you'll see we have both active and suspended buyers, people who are currently actively looking for a home and those who suspended their search, and the same two subcategories for sellers, active and suspended. And then on the right, you see that we also focused on areas that were COVID heavy. These are 30 markets, I'll show you the list in a moment, where the pandemic was particularly acute in the United States. Then we have COVID light areas, which is everywhere else in the United States. And we divided buyers and sellers both by COVID heavy and COVID light. Take a moment now to look at the list of COVID heavy areas, metropolitan areas across the United States. If you're on this list, when I talk about COVID heavy, this is referring to you. So let me move on by sharing some good news. Your sector is even more highly valued now than it was before. Two statements I want to start off with. Majorities strongly agree, both buyers and sellers, particularly during the pandemic, our real estate agent's guidance is especially valued. 54% of buyers, 62% of sellers strongly agree with that. And nearly 60% of buyers and sellers strongly agree buying and selling real estate is an essential service. With that good news, let's talk about virtual tours during a pandemic and how to boost their value. I want to put this in context a little bit by talking about the comfort level of buyers and sellers in doing things like conducting business on a computer and reviewing and signing documents electronically. You see in that first pairing of bars that 70% of buyers and 67% of sellers say that they are very comfortable doing those things. And then you see all the subcategories of people who over-index, where higher percentages of those as compared to the total are comfortable doing those things. So people living in COVID-heavy areas over-index, people who are active either buying and selling as opposed to suspending, they over-index, men much more so than women, middle-aged people more so than other age groups, people in the Northeast and West as opposed to other parts of the country, and people who live in cities as opposed to suburbs or rural areas, all over-index. And as a follow-on to that, you see their comfort level with online tours and conducting their search or their sale using technology that allows prospective buyers or sellers to take a virtual tour of a home. And so you see 57% of buyers, 59% of sellers say they're very comfortable with this. And the subgroups, again, are actually very similar to the previous ones on the previous slide. So let's talk about buyers for a second. They say that virtual tours are great for vetting. And what I mean by that is 55% strongly agree. Virtual home tours allow buyers to quickly distinguish between homes they dismiss and homes they'd seriously consider. So they really have a great value there. But they're not quite a substitute for a visit. You see that 37% of buyers strongly agree that taking a virtual tour of a home for sale is an acceptable substitute for taking a tour in person, compared to 52% of sellers who feel the same way about selling their home that way. And then when you change the description and the wording of this particular statement, you get a little bit more agreement from buyers, but it's not terribly much. And that is taking a thorough virtual tour of a home for sale, where one can carefully examine each room in depth and then ask follow-up questions to the agent and or owner as an acceptable substitute for taking a tour in person. So you get 42% who strongly agree with that among buyers, 50% among sellers. And yet, 2 out of 5 buyers would actually buy a home without a visit. 41% say, thanks to the internet, I can envision buying a home without ever physically stepping inside. And 53% of sellers think that they could envision selling their home without anybody stepping inside. That said, though, there's a real polarization here. 53% of buyers say, even though prospective buyers can take virtual tours of homes, someone who buys a home without ever visiting it is making a huge mistake. So with all that as backdrop, there are very practical ways to boost the value of virtual tours, and here are 2 of them. 59% buyers and sellers say that virtual tours would be more useful if they included a tour of the neighborhood as well as of the home, both inside and outside. And majorities also say virtual tours would be more valuable if they were paired with access to written information about home improvements the seller has made. So these are the additional things that buyers and sellers would like to see when it comes to virtual tours. And it's important to note, too, that agents enhance the virtual experience, not an either-or. A majority of buyers and sellers said, and strongly agreed, it is very important to have a real estate professional help buyers navigate many of the virtual home buying options. And the next data point, it's actually good that this is a low number. When buyers take virtual home tours rather than in-person tours, the value of real estate agents goes down significantly, and only 38% strongly agree with that. So let's transition from virtual tours to precautions and say that most precautions are viewed as good ideas that buyers and sellers would comply with. So we're going to talk about precautions in 2 different categories. The first category are precautions that require one's own involvement. So we start off by having buyers evaluate pandemic precautions, and they looked at more than a dozen. I'm going to show those to you now one at a time just so you can wrap your head around the precautions we asked the buyers to evaluate. Then I'm going to talk to you about how they evaluated them and what we found. So the precautions that they evaluated were: allow only the real estate agent to touch anything in the home with gloves only. Don't allow children under the age of 12. End the practice of having agents drive with prospective buyers in a single car. Limit the amount of time a visitor can stay in the home to 30 minutes. Limit the number of visitors in the home to 2 to 4 at a time, including the agent. Prohibit all visitors from touching anything in the home. Doors and cabinets will be pre-opened. Provide sanitary wipes, so if a visitor needs to touch something, he or she can use the wipe. Require all buyers and sellers to review a list of CDC guidelines for protecting oneself from COVID-19 and have those buyers and sellers sign a document indicating they have read the list. Require all people in the home, buyers, sellers, and agents, to wear gloves, masks, and shoe covering. Require all sellers, buyers, and agents to have their temperatures taken prior to showing or visiting a home. Require all sellers, buyers, and agents to pass a nasal swab test prior to showing or visiting a home. Require buyers and sellers to complete a form certifying they have no symptoms or COVID-19 related illnesses. Require buyers and sellers to sign a document outlining protocols for notification if one of them shows symptoms of illness after the visit, and require buyers, sellers, and agents to remain 6 feet apart at all times. So those are the precautions. We asked the respondents in the study to evaluate them along 2 different metrics. Along the x-axis, we asked them on a scale from 1 to 10, how bad or good an idea is it? 1 being very bad, 10 being very good. And then we had another scale we asked them to evaluate it, their own willingness to comply with the precaution. 1 being not at all willing, 10 being very willing. And what you see in that shaded area near the top right corner of the screen is that all these precautions fell into a very narrow band. Let me enlarge that so you can see specifically what those dots represent. And what you see is that toward the top right corner, providing sanitary wipes was the highest scoring, both in terms of being a good idea and willingness to comply, followed by keeping people 6 feet apart, everybody wearing masks, gloves, and shoe coverings, and limiting to 2 to 4 visitors at a time. Then moving down toward the bottom left, nasal swab test was the item that scored the lowest. And we've seen in other research, nasal swab tests are seen as invasive, uncomfortable, and people don't want to do them. Then we asked the sellers about a bunch of precautions, some which were different from what you saw from the buyers. Let me just take you through this list quickly, and you can see what they were asked to evaluate. Allowing the agent only to touch anything and they had to wear gloves, removing all the pets from the home, requiring the buyers and sellers to review a list of CDC guidelines and sign a document saying they had done that, require all the people in the home to wear gloves, masks, and shoe coverings, require all the sellers to vacate the house during the showing, require all sellers, buyers, and agents to have their temperatures taken, require a nasal swab test, require the buyers and sellers to complete a form certifying they have no symptoms, require buyers and sellers to sign a document outlining protocols for notification if someone shows a symptom after the visit, require buyers, sellers, and agents to stay 6 feet apart, require the agent to affirm in writing he or she has been fever and illness-free for the past 14 days, and require the seller to affirm the same thing. Let me show you what this chart looks like. Again, a tight clustering. The things that score the highest, everybody wears masks, gloves, and shoe coverings and keeps 6 feet apart, and the agent affirms that they've had no illness. Again, the lowest scoring one, not a surprise, nasal swab test. So I just showed you precautions that require one's own involvement. That's the first category of precaution. There's a second category of precautions that require other people to do things on your behalf. We asked, for example, buyers to rate on a scale from 1 to 10 how good or bad an idea is for something that the seller and or the agent would do for them. At the top of the list, make hand sanitizer available throughout the home. Note the seller cleans and disinfects frequently touched objects and surfaces. Informing visitors that the home has been professionally sanitized or fumigated before it was open to visitors. In the entryway, the agent provides visitors a list of all precautions taken in the home to ensure its sanitization. All those 4 items scored 8 or higher. The rest of them are all in the 7s. Require the seller to affirm that all residents have been fever and illness-free for the past 14 days. Require the agent to affirm the same thing. Remove all the pets from the home. Require all the sellers to vacate the house and lay floor protection paper throughout the home to signal to visitors where it's okay to walk. On the flip side, we ask sellers to rate things that buyers or agents would do. Highest scoring one at 7.9. Limit the number of visitors in the home to 2 to 4 at a time, including the agent. Next, provide sanitary wipes so if a visitor needs to touch something, he or she can use it to wipe. Make hand sanitizer available throughout the house. In the entryway, agent provides a list of all the precautions taken in the home to ensure its sanitization. Limit the amount of time, a visitor can stay in the home. Prohibit all visitors from touching anything in the home. Doors, cabinets will be pre-opened. Inform all visitors that the home was professionally sanitized or fumigated before it was open to visitors. Lay floor protection paper throughout the home. And then finally, don't allow children under 12 into the home. Again, they're all seen as good ideas, both the seller and the buyer list I just showed you. The question is at one of degree. Nothing scored really low. And then there are 3 precautions that we asked people whether, well, we asked about a variety of the precautions that they just rated, and we said, which ones do you think will continue or should continue once the pandemic has long passed? The 3 you see on the screen now are the 3 that they said overwhelmingly were the ones that they thought will endure. The first one, making hand sanitizer available throughout the house. A majority of buyers, a near majority of sellers thought that. Provide sanitary wipes so if a visitor needs to touch something, he or she can use it to wipe. Majority of buyers, 41% of sellers. And then the next one, limit the number of visitors in the home to 2 to 4 at a time, including the agent. And you see 45% of buyers and 35% of sellers. All the other items on the list you previously saw scored much lower than those 3. Those are the 3 that are likeliest to endure. Now, let's talk for a moment about litigious buyers and sellers. The survey revealed that some buyers and sellers may be tempted to sue brokers if they contract COVID-19 during a real estate showing. These are interesting statistics, and it's good for you to be aware of the heightened sensitivity of the buyers and sellers during this health pandemic. But this does not necessarily mean that buyers and sellers would have a strong case for suing their brokers. We asked a couple of questions in this section. The first one we asked of buyers was this. Imagine you had visited a home on the 1st of the month, and on the 7th of the month, you found out that one of the residents had COVID-19. A few days later, you came down with the illness yourself. How likely would you be to pursue legal action against your real estate broker? And on a scale from 1 to 10, these are the percentages scoring it at 8, 9, or 10. In other words, likely to sue. You see 38% of all the buyers that they'd be likely to sue in that scenario, and the people that, or the categories of respondents who are even likelier are those living in COVID-heavy areas, those who are active in their buying search, men very highly compared to women, people 34 and under, 43% of them would be more likely to sue, highly likely to sue, middle-aged people just slightly over-indexed, people living in the Northeast, and people living in cities. In fact, the highest incidence was among people in cities, as you see, 53% that they'd be very likely to sue in this scenario. We then altered this scenario, and we said, imagine the same scenario, but the only difference is that you signed a release before seeing the home, holding your real estate broker harmless if you or a member of your family came down with COVID-19. In that situation, how likely would you be to pursue legal action against your real estate broker? And here you see 29% in this scenario would still be very likely to sue, and the subgroups that are likely to sue skew male, skewed toward the Northeast, and skewed toward people who live in cities. What about sellers? Well, imagine they showed their home on the 1st of the month, and on the 7th, they found out that one of the visitors had COVID-19, and then a few days later, they came down with it themselves. How likely would they be to pursue legal action against their real estate broker? 48% would say they're very likely to sue. The ones who over-index here most pronouncedly are, again, men. In this case, it's middle-aged men as opposed to younger. People, again, living in the Northeast, and people who live in cities. Nearly 2/3 of people who live in cities would do this. And then imagine the same scenario. The only difference is they signed a release before showing the home. Here you see 41% would still be very likely to sue, and the over-indexing, again, men, middle-aged, Northeast, living in a city. And then we also asked people how willing they would be to comply with a request to sign a form waiving their rights to sue the seller or agent for COVID-related claims. You see 58% of all the buyers said they'd be willing to comply. But the ones who under-index, the ones who are somewhat less likely to comply, are in particular those 34 and younger. Agents provide high value, and during the pandemic, they need to meet high expectations. We found, for example, that 2/3 strongly agreed, buyers and sellers, nearly 2/3. Agents should understand state and federal protocols for COVID-19 safety and take the lead for buyers and sellers at homes for sale. And also, nearly 2/3 strongly agreed, if a buyer or seller is not following health protocols during a home visit, I expect the real estate agent to address the matter and resolve it. Agents also have to know how to close electronically. A majority said, first, that they would be comfortable signing closing documents electronically for a real estate transaction, and a larger percentage said it's essential that an agent or broker be knowledgeable about ways to electronically sign some or all closing documents for a real estate transaction. The thing also to keep in mind is that agents add value to the online search. An agent, for example, can help buyers glean more valuable information from online listings than buyers could uncover on their own. A majority of buyers and even larger majority of sellers strongly agree with that. They also strongly agree an agent can save a buyer the time and stress of weeding through online listings. And a sizable, nearly 2/3 majority say an agent should work with sellers to provide more in-depth pictures and videos of properties than what buyers can find in online search portals. And then there are other steps that people have to go through in order to buy or sell a home. We wanted to know people's comfort level with these things. And you see that the comfort level varies tremendously across these 3 different steps. Let's talk about them one at a time. The first one is closing on a home remotely, where the buyer and seller are not physically together to sign documents, but instead do so electronically. Half of buyers and nearly 3/5 of sellers say they would be very comfortable with that. Next one, having sellers stay secluded in part of the home while an inspector and buyers evaluate the home. A majority of sellers say they'd be very comfortable with that, but 42% of buyers say they'd be very comfortable. And then for the last one, an appraiser views only the exterior in person and relies additionally on viewing photos of the interior. 46% of sellers and just 29% of buyers say they'd be very comfortable with that. And it turns out, interestingly, that 40% of buyers and 52% of sellers strongly agree, I could be comfortable buying or selling a home without ever meeting my real estate agent in person. So recognizing that so many buyers and sellers feel comfortable doing that, what's the best way to communicate? Well, we found that what would make people most comfortable, both buyers and sellers, and make them feel more connected to their agent. Talking on the phone, you see at least 2/3 talking on the phone for them is the thing that makes them most comfortable. Followed closely behind by talking via Skype, FaceTime, Zoom, or some other technology that allows face-to-face conversation. You see a bit of a drop-off with email, but still a majority. And then you see another big drop communicating via text, and then much less so watching instructional videos posted online by the agent. What this is telling us is that people want to be able to talk to their agent, particularly during a pandemic, and they need to have that communication back and forth in real time, orally. Let's circle back to where we started. One last chart. Agents really do matter during a pandemic. These are the percentages who say that during the current pandemic, relying on a real estate professional when searching for a home or selling a home is much more important than before. 47% of buyers and 53% of sellers strongly agreed. And you see where it over-indexes. Again, COVID-heavy areas, active buyers, men more so than women, middle-aged people, Northeast and Western residents, and people who live in cities. Let's wrap up by talking about action items for the current moment. First, actively help buyers and sellers get more out of online. Pair virtual tours with written information about home improvement. Be sure to include a tour of the neighborhood with the house tour. Actively engage in the online search process for or with buyers. Next, be prepared to limit the number of visitors at one time. Keep the house clean. Stock up on sanitizer and wipes. They're likely going to be permanent. Understand why buyers and sellers might be litigation prone. Know the protocols, follow them, and don't be afraid to enforce them. Talk to your clients, don't just text and email them. And never, ever forget your value. Buyers and sellers need you now, and they know it. This has been Rich Thau, and Jon Last and I thank you for your time.